these are their names. They might not remember all the words, but at least they can write the words down and they can recognize them. So a good question to have as a pre-class quiz is to throw them all the names and tell them to put them in the 4 different groups. Which one comes under the glycolysis, which one comes under the intermediate step, the citric acid cycle, and the electron transport chain. So they at least know. It's like looking at a football team, and you're looking at the football team and you know these people play, this is the goalkeeper, this is the front line, and this is all those people. You kind of know where everybody plays. Now, you don't have to know the details, because when we come to the details of the play, that is what the teacher is going to do in class. So when you come to class, you already know who the players are and which team is playing which team. And you basically now start saying, for the first goal, it is this person that scored. He passed the ball from this one to that one, to that one, to that one, and boom, there was a goal. All right. So these are now, we're starting to look at the significance, describe the significance and analyze the ATP yields between the different pathways. So you'll basically have pathway 1, pathway 2, pathway 3, and which reagents are, which intermediates are used in each of those steps, and what is the total ATP production. So they basically now start seeing the formula about all those items come together. They see the formula, and you start explaining, why is this pathway significant? Why was it historically important? How does our knowledge of it inform the way we do other things? And so then the discussion comes up and somebody will ask, so why does it do this and why does it do? So why do these organisms thrive better than these other ones? Oh, okay, now it makes sense. Suddenly, because when you put oxygen as a catalyst, the organisms move from anaerobic to aerobic, and they produce 40 times more energy. And that's why the species that use oxygen are basically a lot more competitive in an oxygenated environment, and so on. Anyway, so those things now start making sense. All right. So after the students have seen all that playing out in class, then you can now send them home and say, okay, I have an assignment for you. And here is an assignment I want you to write a short essay on. And, you know, the short essay is, describe the technique behind the 3-person baby and how it relates to cellular respiration. Okay, now what is a 3-person baby? Well, for some, that is actually a concept that was developed by some scientists out in England. And what happens is, genetically, we all know that genetically we basically have 2 parents. So you have a mother and a father, and the 2 gametes join, and boom, you have an offspring. But then what happened is, when you look at reproduction, basically the egg cell comes with all the contents, the nucleus, the cytoplasm, the mitochondria, and all those things. But the sperm cell basically comes with the nucleus, which is basically the genetic material from the male. But then that means that all the mitochondria in the offspring actually comes 100% from the mother. Now, that means if mother has a mitochondrial illness, then that means guaranteed the offspring are going to have that. And so these doctors came with a technique where they will basically take the nucleus from the mother, the nucleus from the father, and take the cytoplasm from a healthy mother, so that the baby can then not have the mitochondrial illnesses that are usually inherited. Now, that means then genetically, the offspring is basically has DNA from a surrogate mother, has DNA from the other mother, and so basically it has 2 mothers. Now, this was a very big issue ethically, of course. And there's ethics in there. There's, of course, the legal part, where now you're talking about how does this work legally, because you now have basically three parents involved. And then sometimes you can even have a fourth one involved, because if the mother that donates the nucleus and the mother that donates the cytoplasm, which is the mitochondria, and the mother that actually births the baby might be a surrogate mother. So you basically have three mothers in the mix. So that is, to me, a very good topic for discussion, especially when it comes to ethics and all that. But then there's the technology behind it and the biology behind it, and how does that work? So we're not only looking at that, but then you see, this is a topic on cellular respiration. But suddenly, we're not only talking about cellular respiration, we're also talking about genetics. And then we're also talking about protein synthesis and the whole idea of genetic engineering. So you get all those things together to actually create a very high order discussion that the student has to put this together. Now, this can be a dissertation, but you're basically asking your students to do this, maybe even in a freshman class. So what you do is that in the end here, instead of writing a paper, doing a study or all that, you can just basically tell them to write an essay. Now, what this does is that the students have an opportunity to look at the basic material, to look at the metabolic pathways, and now they have actually looked at how practical this is. I usually tell my students, you go to class and you learn these things, but then you just don't know where they will come up, because somewhere in the news, they're going to hear about a 3-person baby. Somewhere in the family, they might have to come up with issues of fertility. And who knows, when they are up to that point, they might be making very tough decisions on their own reproductive privileges. And this is something that they will remember, oh, okay, I actually learned this in school, and this is what I remember from the class. Because you'll be amazed. I teach pre-med students, and at one time I was actually working with a postdoc program at the University of Alabama in Birmingham. And we used to have very interesting cases. And you'd see a parent comes in, or an adult grown up comes up, and they're trying to basically resolve, let's say, for example, in this case, they're basically trying to deal with fertility issues, and they're trying to consider getting a baby and IVF and what's that. And they seem very lost in terms of what is this technique really about? You know, they're basically reading YouTube and Facebook and all that. But the reality is that they took a liberal arts education and they took a biology class, but that's not really what is informing them at that point. And part of it could be that when the class was taught, it didn't have these extensions that people can actually apply later in life. And those are some of the things you want to basically plug in, so that this is not a topic that ended in the classroom with an A, but a topic that basically opened up their lives into lifelong learning. All right. So I want to, because of the time that we took a break, I want to run through something real quick before we come into a reflection session. And this is where I was going to have my questions, and then I was going to give you a break. So what I will do is I will give you something else here, something real quick. I know KCA University has a learning management system that solves a whole big problem. I am working with institutions out in some other places that will remain unnamed that don't even have a learning management system. So this basically becomes a nightmare. But for us, with the learning management system, it makes things really easy. Assessment. Assessment is a big part of teaching, because when you have an objective, You've given them the content. You have to assess whether the objectives were met. And one of the biggest nightmares is exam time is a nightmare for students, is a nightmare for faculty, because they have to basically take a week off to read and grade those exams, and it is hectic. So I like to encourage you to actually invest some time to create computer-assisted assessments so that the computer can basically grade for you some of those things. And I know you're thinking, okay, here's a multiple choice questions. No, there are some things we can't test with multiple choice. Well, I want to quickly go through something that will help us understand that, yes, we can use computer-assisted testing assessments by actually making the computers do more for us. I know there are all those things that computers can do, and I just want to go through something that I have found very helpful. And this is basically how to make your multiple choice questions not easy questions, so that you can drive higher order information within a multiple choice question. And so this is the Bloom's taxonomy, going back to it again. And basically, I look at a question like this. If you wanted to look at the different levels of Bloom's taxonomy, here are the questions when it comes to the characteristics of a cell membrane. So question number one at the very bottom, understanding, list 3 characteristics of the cell membrane. It has a phospholipid bilayer, it is semi-permeable, all those things. So you can list them down there. There's nothing about understanding, it's just basically, do you remember the words? Okay, so they list them there. Now, the second level, you can say, what characteristics of the cell membrane determines, regulates the entry of material into the cell? This is the semi-permeability. There's polar and non-polar material and so on. How do cells regulate the entry of materials in and out of the cells? Osmosis, diffusion. Then it tells you distinguish between osmosis and diffusion. All right. How do membranes regulate osmotic potential? Then that now becomes even higher order. That's evaluation. Now, when you go to creating, you can say, design an industrial membrane system that can be used to purify bottled drinking water. This is very, very applied. All right. So these are the different levels you can ask. And these questions basically ask for an essay. Students are writing down, they are writing down information, and you're going to read it and evaluate it to see whether they actually answered the question correctly. This is where most of us are. It takes a lot of time. It might be easy to set up the question because it takes you a few minutes to jot the questions down and then give them to the students, but you pay for it. When it's time for grading, you spend a lot of time doing it. So if computers can do this, why don't we actually try to make them machinable, if there's a term like that, so that the computers can actually help us to do that. That way, then we don't drop out the assessment piece when it comes to the flipped classroom and we are spending so much time discussing, and then we end up saying, okay, we don't have time for assessments, therefore we're only doing 1 or 2 assessments a semester, which is basically not ideal. So here is what I do. I take a question and I give a scenario. So you basically already have moved 3 steps up. The moment you give a scenario and you're asking students to evaluate, to apply something, then you're going from all the way from remembering to understanding, you're putting them at the application stage. So already that puts them up. So typically I make up a scenario. I create a scenario up here, and then I create that scenario, and then I ask a question, and then I give the students multiple choice questions. That way the computer can basically grade it for me after having created the scenario. And I have to recognize Dr. Melissa Richardson, who is a colleague of mine. And actually, she was a student in my department when I was teaching there. So she graduated, went to Johns Hopkins, came back with her PhD, and there she is in the same faculty as I do. And so we still work together, and it makes a really good working team. So she basically worked with me on a project where we're trying to basically mechanize some of these processes. We were co-teaching a course, And so we basically decided that we need to change these instruments so that we can continue having assessments more regularly without compromising the level at which we teach the course. So basically, for content, he says, Kylie looked into a microscope and saw an animal cell. And after the cell was treated with an unknown compound, she saw something strange. The cell organelles looked dispersed and were not contained in a restricted space as they were supposed to be. Okay, now this is basically application. So you have a cell is usually membrane bound. I put an unknown compound, and this compound basically changes the structure, denatures the cell membrane, and suddenly everything is flowing all over. Okay, if I know the characteristics of the cell membrane, and I know that the cell membrane can be dissolved, I can already speculate that the unknown compound basically dissolved the phospholipid bilayer, and basically all those organelles are moving around because there is no longer a cell membrane. All right, so now having understood that, now if a student doesn't remember the characteristics of the cell membrane, then they don't know that. So then they come to the question and say, what type of molecule was likely broken down during the treatment that caused the cell organelles to be dispersed? So they have to basically remember that it is the phospholipid bilayer that was dissolved. So this is a multiple choice question, yes, but it is a different kind of multiple choice question. It is not testing at the lower level. It's actually at the application level. And just the idea that you can push your questions up and still make them multiple choice means then you can actually now take time, invest your time in creating the kind of questions you need so that you can actually mechanize the process. And that way then you can actually make the assessment an essential component of your teaching. Now, typically, it's very easy to find questions, multiple choice questions on the lower end, remembering and understanding. But then to get questions that are higher up is a lot more rare. That's why you basically have to build them yourself. So what is happening here? To save time, I use the same scenario to basically create 5 questions. So that allows me to move further with the same case. So I say, what type of molecule was likely broken down? And the answer is the phospholipid bilayer. And then now I ask you another question to see whether you really understand. It says, the abundance presence of which of the following molecules will indicate that lipids were broken down into monomers? Oops. Okay, so I'm not now looking at the dissolving of the phospholipid bilayer, but I'm saying when you break down lipids, what do they break down into? So they have to still understand that the lipids are made of fatty acids and glycerol. Then I go now to another question and say, Kylie is trying to determine how much RNA is present in her sample. Which of the following molecules will she stain for? Whoa, now that moves from the composition of molecules. It's going to basically testing of organic molecules at the cellular level. And you're talking about RNA. And if RNA, you have to know the difference between RNA and DNA. And you're looking at a staining techniques. And of course, RNA has uracil, which DNA does not. Now, these are very engaging questions. They are at least applied and above, and you are evaluating the effectiveness of a process and so on. So I just wanted to do this to tell you that just because you are spending more time discussing in class doesn't mean you'll cover less material, and it doesn't mean that you will not do the regular assessments. Well, I think I want to stop there in the interest of time so that we actually have some time to do our reflections. So if we can go back to the chat room, I'll stop sharing. We go back to the chat room. I know there were some comments earlier before the break, and I'm sure there's something. And if anybody has a question, please put it on the chat, and I'll let Professor Gao moderate from there. Is that correct, Professor Ngige?
Yeah, sure. You're right, Professor.
Okay. So we have about 30 minutes to interact on this one.
Okay. Thank you, Prof. Onesimus. It's true, we had some questions on the chat before we had the interruption, but I know Wycliffe Nyaribo was one of them. So maybe I can give you a chance, Wycliffe Nyaribo, just unmute and then you can ask the question. And then the other question was from Milka Njuguna. So likewise, do the same. After Nyaribo, you can unmute and ask the question. And then the rest of us, you can either put your questions on the chat or you can raise your hand and then you'll get an opportunity to ask. So Nyaribo, Dr. Nyaribo, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Onesimus, for that wonderful presentation. My question relates to the flipped classroom. And I was asking in relation to a situation where you have more than 150 students in a class. Is it applicable? Is that model applicable? Thank you.
Thank you, Doc, for the question. Sometimes I just get scared when I look at the numbers of students in some classrooms. And over time, I have collaborated with some colleagues to actually put up techniques on teaching a large classroom. It makes it more difficult, that's correct, but it doesn't make it impossible. What I like to say real quick was that at that point, there's a place where we talked about the group flipped classroom. That can happen. There's various things. So I'll say that, yes, it does work. It just takes a lot more work to do it. Because when it comes to the quality of education, we don't want to get to a point where a student feels like, I went to a class of 200 students and therefore I don't understand. You want it to be that as much as possible, the student who goes to a class of 200 and a student that goes to a class of 20, there are certain basic things they actually came out with in the course. And I'll mention a few things. We talked about the group flipped classroom. Now, something else that will be very helpful is peer assessments, where you give the students work, especially when you're talking about the understanding and the lower level. You give them some work to do, and then they do the work and they basically submit. But then when they are submitting, they are being graded. They're grading each other in peer groups, so that you tell them this is what you give them the assignment and you tell them, here is a rubric and here, go ahead, grade yourselves. And then what you'll do now is that instead of grading all the 150, you basically put them in groups of 10. So you're basically having time to assess just 15 assignments instead of 150. So that kind of cuts down the work. And like I say, there's this also the other part where you do the assessments in terms of giving them questions that are higher order and so on, so that they can be computerized. You can do that. Now, the other thing is you typically work very well with projects and groups, and you might want to do something like at the beginning of the semester, you put students in groups and then you give them a project. There's a discussion, there's this going on that they have to produce at the end of that period. And then just in case some groups did not work out nicely, somewhere mid-semester, you regroup all the students, and you can use either your past experience or how did they perform in the first part of the semester, and then you regroup them. That way, then students have an opportunity to mingle with other people, with different people in the classroom, and then they can form groups in a groups in the new groups in the second half of the semester where they interact with one another. So it is more challenging, definitely, but it's still doable. Thank you.
Okay, Milka, please.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you for this organization of the training. I remember how sometimes you apply this in class, especially at the beginning of the trimester. And then at some point you remember you have huge content to cover. And then you kind of like now you're rushing. So my challenge was, how do you go with this maybe to the end of the trimester, like in computational classes? Because sometimes the content is so huge and then this time you have to cover this is very short. Though at times you find you are able to engage the students very well, like the very first month, they enjoy, you find that they are connecting so well, but only to realize that they are about to do the exams. So my concern was, how do we keep this to the end when the time is too short? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Milka, for your question. This is a very good one, because sometimes you design this thing and class is so exciting, and it's funny. When the class is exciting, the students are engaged, they come to class, the attendance is not a problem, and then you realize, oh my goodness, we were supposed to be in chapter 5, we are still in chapter 2 of the book. How are we going to do this? And that is a problem. Now, something I like to do here is I like us to go back a little bit. You know, sometimes it needs to go, and this is where it's important to actually, this is something that has to be integrated from the way the course is designed and then the way it is delivered. So if you say, let's go back, I know most of us, you go to the chair and the chair says, you're going to teach this class, here is the syllabus and here is the textbook. The syllabus has the objectives and it has all the chapters you have to cover. And sometimes we go back and ask, okay, so this objective, does it have to be covered in 5 chapters? Can it be covered in 2 chapters? What really is the content that is relevant to that objective? And that's sometimes where we really have to align all those things. And you realize very quickly that sometimes we tend to do a lot of content that is not supporting the objective. Or rather, sometimes it supports the objectives, but then you have one objective and it has 3 chapters to do it. Can we break this down to maybe 1 chapter or something? Or can we do a horizontal coverage rather than a deep dive, a vertical one? So sometimes you just basically have to go back to the design part where you look at the content and say, okay, this content is a lot to cover in 1 semester. Can I meet the same objective by changing the amount of content or covering the same amount of content but at a different level? Say, for example, for objective 1, I just need them to understand. So in understanding, I don't have to go deep dive. They can just basically read. And sometimes as a teacher for the course, you can say, for chapter 1, I just want you to read and take a quiz. So when we start discussion, we discuss chapter 2. Because if chapter 1 was basically a background from a prerequisite course they had already taken, we don't need to spend 2 weeks on it. We can spend less time on it, and then that allows us to move faster down the road. Okay, that is one thing. And the way I answer that is basically look at the alignment and see whether the objectives have the appropriate amount of material. Maybe some have more, some have less, but that needs to be aligned. Now, the other part is when you look at the testing, the test is coming up and we are going to basically do an assessment. Now, if you have been teaching at the understanding, back to Bloom's taxonomy. If you have been teaching at the understanding and remembering level, you don't want to test at the evaluation and analysis level, because then you're teaching at this level and you're assessing at a different level. You basically need to teach the level at which you assess. Say, for example, if all the chapter 1 to 5 that you've covered in the first part of the semester, you've been going all the way to the top in evaluating and understanding. Then the test comes in and you feel you have to have 15 questions for each chapter. That's really not well aligned in that matter. And I know when I start talking about exams, that is a very touchy subject, especially on the continent, because the exams are ironclad, they are kept in a safe. There is a system of external evaluators that have to look at these things. So I say that knowing fully well that it is very difficult to basically navigate the whole exam process. And some of these things are things that you can do as an instructor, and others are basically policy issues that will have to be covered from a higher level outside the classroom. Because when you have an external body that comes in to evaluate the appropriateness of exams, now you find out that the criteria they use to determine whether a question is appropriate for the course is very different. And I have talked to external examiners in a certain situation and found out that something as basic as a chart that gives you the Bloom's taxonomy, and then you ask, okay, this question, what level of Bloom's taxonomy does it come from? Well, at what level? Some of these things are intuitive and they kind of look at them as second nature, but sometimes we really need a way that we can document and analyze some of these things. And in the absence of that, then we're basically using a system that has no well understood rubric. And so some of these issues might have to be policy driven in terms of when an external examiner comes and looks at your test, how do they really determine that the test is appropriate for the content that was delivered for that course? So I think I've at least touched on a little bit. I see some questions coming out regarding this. I'll let Professor Ogao kind of curate them before I go back to it. Thank you.
Okay, so we move on to Joshua Omanyu has two questions. I'll start with the one that is closely related to what Milka's question was, the one you've just answered. So he says, in line with Milka's question, quantitative such as calculus, where students, especially the young ones with no much background, can't make much of the content until they meet a teacher to break it down for them. So the home sessions might not meet the intended objectives. How do we navigate about this? So that's the first one. Maybe Prof, you can respond to that.
Okay, now in terms of preparatory work, I do believe that yes, it might be difficult to navigate a situation, like we feel like some topics are so technical that students have to be introduced first before they actually go out and try it. But I do also believe that you can break it down into bite size, break it down to smaller pieces, because most of the time when you get a very technical thing like that, it basically comes at a much higher level where you need a prerequisite for the course. So what you might want to do is look at the prerequisite for the course so that you at least get the students to review the prerequisites so that when they come into class, they now know okay, these are the prerequisites I needed to be able to understand this material. And even, especially, now in most academic institutions, there's, we get open enrollment systems. So students come at various levels of preparation. Some of them have very little and others have more. So sometimes you want to be able to say, okay, we're going to do a very difficult, complex discussion today. But before you come to class, here are the prerequisites for your course that you covered in the first part, like say, for example, I'm doing genetics part 2. I say, here are the things in genetics part 1 that you did last year you need to remember in order to come to class prepared for this class. So that might be another way to look at it, so that you give people some time on the material before they actually come in. Thank you.
Okay, so the other question from Joshua is, I think he just wants you to confirm whether this is true or not. He says, the concept of flipped classroom seems to fit technology-enabled distance learning or blended learning, where students have a chance to engage with the content beforehand and then meet the instructors in tutorial sessions where they engage. So he wants you to confirm whether this is the case.
Well, technology, thank you so much, Joshua, again. Technology makes it easier, but you can still use the very same old traditional thing. I was talking to a colleague that I'm coming to do this presentation, and she asked me, are you going to give them some prior work to do before they come for the webinar? I said, well, I wish I did that, because, that is really a good way that I would have done the flipped classroom, because we're talking about a flipped classroom, but we did not flip our webinar. But the idea is that you can basically do it in any format. It doesn't have to be technology driven. Even if it is the old-fashioned face-to-face without a computer with a simple textbook, you can tell students, go read the textbook from page 5 to page 18 whatever pages, and then answer this question 1, 2, 3 before you come to class. You can do that. And then typically what I would do in those days of face-to-face, I'll tell the students to read these pages, and then when they come to class, the first few minutes, I basically give them a quiz on the questions that I told them to go and read. And what that usually did for me is it helped students come on time, because we do the quiz in the first 5 minutes. You walk in, pick up a quiz, answer the questions. There are 5 of them, and you put them down. That now becomes the attendance for class for that day. And then it also makes sure that the students actually read. Now, I used to tell students also, you can come in early to class and ask me if you feel like this question is going to be in the quiz and I don't know the answer. You come to class early and ask me the question. I'll give you the answer. And then when I give you the quiz, you basically get it right. So it motivates students to actually come early. So it can actually be in both technology poor or low technology environments or high technology environments. It just depends on how, what tools you use. And this goes back to pedagogy. I believe personally that the pedagogy drives the technology and not the other way around, because when you are student-centered, you decide what your students need, you decide what the approach is going to be, and then decide what technologies you can use. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Prof. The other, I think this is a comment from Dr. Ibrahim Ondabu. He says that the home sessions may be an opener to the content, so that by the time the lecturer comes on board, he can teach the students in what is not so strange to them and relating it to practice. So I think he's just adding in something related to what you've just said. Yeah. So is there any other question? If you have a question, maybe this is the last opportunity. You can raise your hand and then Prof can respond to it.
I think I see a comment from Joshua again.
Okay, Joshua. So Joshua says, adult students who operate under tight work schedules may not very well utilize the home sessions because of work and related schedules. Wouldn't this then mean that the flipped classroom pedagogy may not be very suitable for this category of students? Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for the question. This is a good one. And I have a few comments right at the top of my head. And two things first. You know, the non-traditional student is usually somebody with a family, has a job, and is coming to take the class as, you know, the fourth and fifth thing in their day. Now, this has been the case for many years, especially when we go into online education where people are basically coming back to school. But then we also realize in many environments now, the students are getting engaged in more and more things. So it's not only the older non-traditional students, adult learners who used to come in to do school that have these issues, but the issues are now becoming common. Even, you know, you have a student here, they're taking a class, they're trying to graduate, but they already have a job or they have a family they are taking care of. They have a sick family member. Sometimes they have their own children and so on. So this actually is becoming a lot more common. So the way I like to look at it is two ways. Sometimes the prior to class thing, especially for the adult learners, there is something about their life experience that is relevant to what is being studied today. And some way you want to approach it is, I've seen places where the universities admit non-traditional older students and say, like at Oakwood University, they basically say, if you are over 25, you can actually enroll as an adult LEAP program where they start taking life experiences. Say, for example, if the objective of this course is to learn how to use the Microsoft suite, okay? That is the objective of the course. And out of your job where you work, you already have those experiences. So I, as a teacher, don't have to use that, take you through the content of doing that. I can just basically give you a quiz that tests out to figure out, okay, do you understand the Microsoft suite? Yes, I have used it for 5 years on my job. So I don't have to have that on the lecture. I just basically need to give you a placement test where you tested and you basically don't have to go through that content. That's one way to do it. You use their life experiences to basically determine whether those objectives have been met in the course already. Now, the other thing is, in a case of a flipped classroom like that, you might want to start from things that they commonly know. You remember my cellular respiration story, where I first told them to go read and understand the metabolic pathway. Now, that might be a problem for somebody like that, but think about, okay, have you ever seen somebody with a mitochondrial disease? Now, if somebody had a mitochondrial disease, are you open? What are some of the ethical and legal issues that might be the case? You might find the person actually has experience either personally or with a close friend who has gone through fertility treatments, or things like genetic engineering have been they've been exposed to those kind of discussions. So they will come with actually very rich experiences to bring in terms of the legal matters, decision-making, just life choices. So they come, they are not people who are basically, they do have a place in the classroom, and they actually have a very good place in discussions, especially when it comes to the applied component. So if you have a class that is heavy on the non-traditional student side, you might want to engage them at that level, where they come in with their life experiences and basically inform the discussion. I remember having discussions where I was teaching a topic on basically managing environmental waste. And then in my class was somebody that actually worked in a government landfill. Now that person becomes a really big asset to the discussion, because now they can tell you, oh, so this is the theory behind why we do this. You know, I always wonder why when I go to the job, they ask us that we must do this. Oh, so that is why. And so they will tell you what the field looks like. And then you basically be there trying to explain the theory behind it and basically reinforcing some of the information they have. And when they go back to the job, they actually now understand why they do some of those things, which they felt were basically mundane chores that they didn't have to. Okay, I think I covered both parts of that question. Thank you.
Okay. There's another question from Dr. Ibrahim, and it's about the reading culture. So he says most of our students don't have this reading culture. So if you give them something to read, and you'll find only a small percentage, 1 to 3% of them actually do the reading. So he says we need first to see through on how we can develop this reading culture on our students, especially those in full-time category who have the time but fail to embrace that culture. So Prof, what do you have to say about that, the reading culture?
Actually, I like, you just reminded me something very important. I think Professor Bagakas just mentioned that I've been in Nairobi a lot. Now, when I came, I believe in online education. I do 100% online. My children, 11 and 9, are 100% online at that early age. And thankfully, we have the resources to do it. So it's working quite well. Now, we have been in Nairobi for the last 8 months. They were in their school in Huntsville. So they basically didn't tap into the local school. They were basically going on a school online. But the first outing they took when we came back to Alabama is they took a trip to the library and came with a whole bag of books, because we don't have libraries where they can go and borrow kids' books and basically thumb through the books. So they've been doing digital reading a lot. And so, the whole reading culture is very real to me, because you find we have a ton of books. You turn around, there's a book somewhere you can read. You go to some homes, there's just no book anywhere. And even if you wanted a book, you have to really go looking so hard to find one. So yes, the reading culture has to be cultivated. But then that's not to say that we still read things. There are newspapers, there is, our students are constantly on their smartphones reading something. Even when they are talking to you, they are still reading something. So I think the challenge here is to meet them where they are. Send them tweets if they are on Twitter. Give them things to basically follow and read. Get on Facebook and make those Facebook readings count. Because it's not that they are not reading. They are reading. It's just that they are not understanding that the information in class and the information out there is really the same thing. And this whole idea of the flipped classroom is basically trying to remove education from inside the class to outside, so that they understand that there is no hard boundary between what happens in the classroom and what happens outside the classroom. You can actually use the information out there. I mean, they are constantly watching TV. They are constantly reading the internet. So the idea is that to challenge them to basically integrate some of that to useful educational stuff that is career oriented. I'm not sure if I answered that completely.
Yeah, thank you, Prof. I think one from me, and it related to an experience you had. You mentioned of a parent-teacher kind of engagement when the parent found out that the students actually kind of teaching each other. I mean, what other ways can we bring that mindset shift? Because our students are used to that teacher-centered approach. And now you're talking about the flipped classroom. What other ways can you have them, change that mindset?
Well, I don't believe in punitive approaches. I like to at least try the incentive way. And I remember a few years ago, I used to try to encourage students to read and get A's in my class. So what I did is that at the end of the test, I go to the person who got the highest score. And I tell the person with the highest score that they will be able to write the bonus question for the next test. And I tell everybody, I say, if you get an A in this test, you will be the one writing the bonus question for the next test. And the bonus question is usually, they do a question and there's this question that is very engaged. It's rather deep. You really have to dig deep and answer it. But then when you answer it, it gives you so many points so that when you are really in the edge, it's really worth an investment. That's the question that everybody wants to answer and get. Because, sometimes you might not know something and you miss some points here and there. But then when you get the bonus question, then it really improves on your grade. So what I used to do is I tell them, if you get a high score, if you get the top score in this test, then you get to design the question for the next bonus question. And they'll come in and we'll sit together and they'll say, okay, this is what I want to ask. This is the answer I'm looking for. And then we craft it to wait. So you see now, the person who got the highest score in the last test is almost guaranteed, is actually guaranteed to get an A, to get a full score on the bonus because they're the ones who do it. And then with time, people start competing. They want to be the one writing the bonus question. So that is one way that you can do that. I know sometimes in some classes, you might want to make it compulsory that everybody has to participate by presenting, by doing something. But something that really inhibits people into doing that is they don't want to look like they don't know. And when the teacher calls them, they get that stage fright, like, okay, I don't know this. And why is the teacher asking me? Now I'm going to look foolish in front of my classmates, and that is not nice. And they get angry and they get agitated. So they are no longer thinking about the answer, which most likely they actually have, because you're not trying to embarrass them. You're trying to, help everybody learn. So something else I like to do is, even for the student who doesn't seem to be confident about what they know, is over time, you might say, for example, you give the students a problem to solve in class. And then you go to an unlikely student who usually doesn't know much, quite disengaged and doesn't feel confident. And you walk them through the process and you say, oh, okay, you got it, okay? And you ask them, can I ask you to explain this to everybody in class? And usually, hopefully they'll say, yes, I can. And they say, I know you know it, and I want you to actually explain this to everybody. And then you step back, and this is a conversation you had one-on-one. And then you step back and come and say, okay, this is what is going on. How many have the answer? A few hands go up. And you say, okay, guys, okay, we're running out of time, and I want everybody to know exactly what the answer is. And so from the back of class, can you please tell us how this works? And the person stands up and explains. And I know we all gauge each other. We have a pecking order in society. In every community, there's going to be people who feel like, I know this thing more than somebody else, and so knows this thing more than me. And when somebody who other people don't expect actually stands up and says something, people are like, oh, you mean this concept is that easy? Well, it's not that easy. It's that you actually worked with a person and they, so there's a way you can actually stimulate some of this, but I believe it comes down to the personal level. When a student understands that you're not trying to bring them down and you're trying to help them out and you are actually a friend and a partner in this learning process, then they are a lot more eager to participate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof, for responding to those questions. At this juncture, I think I'll hand over to Professor Ngigi. Prof. Ngigi, please.
Hello, Prof, yeah?
Yeah, Prof, I think we're done with the questions. I don't see any hands up or any question on the chat. So maybe back to you.
All right. Thank you very much, Professor Ogao. Thank you very much, Professor Onesimus. What you have just taken us through reminds me the classes that I used to have in instructional technology and media production in education, which again, when you started talking about the Bloom's taxonomy, and I thought of my colleagues who may not have had a chance to go through that. And then it's like, what is all this Bloom's taxonomy about? And the flipping, the Bloom's technology. If you have gone through an education class, especially instructional technology, I know that you'd understand that one very well, which kind of set a stage, God willing, for another kind of lesson, or you can introduce our colleagues to the aspects of Bloom's technology, issues of cognitive learning and assessment. And one thing that I liked most, Prof, is about the aspect of assessment and MCQs. And all along, personally, I believe in that, sometimes when you talk of MCQs, like, no, at university level, you cannot use an MCQ. And there is a way you can do that one and actually even assess at the higher order thinking using the MCQs. Just the way you can assess also high order thinking to a kindergarten. Sometimes there's discussion that no, these are kindergarten, you cannot assess a high order thinking. At that developmental stage of that child, there is a way you can tweak such that to that child, that is high order thinking at that particular age for that particular age group and developmental stage that the child is in. Prof, thank you very much for that. And also, when I look at my clock, your end, it's past 2 a.m. Late in the night, whereas we are enjoying the day. That's a lot of sacrifice, Prof. I'm not sure whether my DVC, Professor Bagakas, is around to see if Professor Bagakas, I'm not sure. Professor Bagakas, are you around? I think he's in another meeting. Okay, so Prof. Onesimus, thank you very much. My gratitude to you for having taken us through this. And I'll just say, Prof, this is a continuation of what we began. And again and again, we'll be coming back to you to give us insights, especially on use of technology in teaching and learning, so that us from this end, we are able to sharpen our ability to handle this hybrid approach to learning, because I think and I believe this is where the world is going. And we ought to be there. As KC University, we cannot be left behind. And again, I would like to thank my colleagues for having availed themselves. I know right now there are some colleagues of us who left the session to attend to other businesses, official businesses of the university. We were at around 60-something before we had that first break. And the numbers resumed back to about 53. Which is commendable. Thank you very much for that. So what I'll do, Prof, I would like to bring in Dr. Priscilla Gashigi, the Dean of School of Education, as well as the chairperson in charge of Center for Teaching and Learning Committee, to give us a crossing player, and maybe she can also make a comment or two before she does the prayer. And then after that, people will be at liberty to leave the meeting. Thank you very much, Professor Onesimus.
Thank you so much.
Karibu. Dr. Gachini?
Thank you, Prof. I want to take this opportunity to further thank Professor Otieno. I want to believe that all of us are very well enlightened now because you are telling us something that is practical. Thank you for assuring us that it is possible. And one thing that has got my attention is that we now stop teaching and start playing the roles of facilitators. I believe that makes our work easier as teachers, and we also have an opportunity of learning more because students will also carry out a lot of research, bring it along with them to class, and we learn because we talk of lifelong learning. Thank you so much, and keep on enlightening us. Every time we invite you, come and encourage us and let us know what is it that we need to do better. Thanks a lot. So let's bow our heads for a word of prayer. Our dear Lord, we thank you for the gift of this day. We also want to thank you for this session that has ended. Indeed, we have learned a lot and we are very, very grateful. We want to thank you for our institution and the leadership of our university, the Vice Chancellor, the Deputy Vice Chancellor, for allowing this to happen. We also want to thank you for the Center for Teaching and Learning under the leadership of Professor Ngigi for the effort of planning for this event that has come out so successfully. Thank you for everything that has happened. We cannot forget to thank you for our facilitator, Professor Otieno, for his selfless sacrifice of time, effort to enlighten us more so in the direction of making teaching and learning more effective. Our prayer is that you continue guiding us as we execute that what we have learned today so that we can be of more benefit to our students. We pray that you bless him and you continue taking care of him far away as he is from Kenya. As we discuss for the rest of the day, we pray that you continue being with us throughout and keep on blessing us and keep on guiding us as an institution. For this we pray, believing and trusting in Jesus' mighty name we pray and believe.
Amen.
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 All right. Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Ashigi. Professor, thank you, and do have a good night.
Thank you so much. And Dr. Gashigi, I want to say that I really wished I took a major in education. I wish I took a degree in education because I ended up in education, but I've taken 20 years to get my degree and I still don't have it.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, bro.
Bye-bye.
Karibu sana. Good night.
Okay.
Mhm.